It's all about money. With your host, CPA and forensic accountant, Sam Rosenfarb.
You're watching It's All About Money. Nobody knows more about money than accountants. Hi, I'm Sam Rosenfarb. I'm a forensic accountant. I've been an accountant for over 30 years. I can tell you from firsthand experience that everybody in some way on a daily basis is motivated by money. As a forensic accountant, I've been involved in hundreds of divorce cases, from simple to the extremely complex. Every divorce involves some money. If you're going through a divorce or know someone that is, stay tuned to this episode of It's All About Money. This show is all about educating you, teaching you about how money plays an important role in all of our lives. Divorce is unpredictable. The more you know about divorce, the greater your ability to control your future in a divorce, and the less stress you'll cause to yourself as your divorce becomes finalized. This episode of It's All About Money questions, is divorce really all about money? To answer this question, today we have two of New Jersey's foremost experts in the field of divorce. Sharon Maggio is my partner at Rosenfarb, Winters & Company, the largest matrimonial accounting firm in the state. Sharon specializes in matrimonial accounting. She's an accredited business appraiser and a personal financial planning specialist. She has extensive experience in tax and financial planning, which she incorporates into her matrimonial practice. Sharon is well known for her ability to meet with both the husband and the wife in one room and work out financial arrangements to satisfy both parties. She's a published writer on issues of divorce, economic loss assessment, tax, and financial planning. Also with me is Judge Michael Diamond, appointed to the Superior Court of New Jersey in 1995 after 29 years of extensive private practice. Judge Diamond is currently a family judge in Passaic County. He's a past president of the Passaic County Bar Association and a founding member of the Family Law Inns of Court. Judge Diamond is a frequent lecturer for the Institute of Continuing Legal Education and the American Academy of Matrimonial Lawyers. Judge Diamond, it's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you, Sam.
What kind of matters come before you on the bench?
Well, in addition to divorce trials, we get a lot of domestic violence matters. I also do sometimes juvenile and what we call non-dissolution matters, which are money matters, custody, that type of thing of people that are not married.
So people who aren't married, you mean they're rooming together? They're
live together, have children together, have a relationship, but are not married, and they come in for relief either for custody or for paternity or for support, something like that, visitation.
Is there common law marriage in the state?
Not in New Jersey, no.
Not in New Jersey. So no matter how many years you're married, you're either no matter how many years you're living together,
yeah.
You're still single.
Single unless you get married.
So if you're living together unmarried, do either spouse gain any rights?
They're not spouses, remember that.
Do either parties, right? Do either parties gain any rights?
Yes, they do gain rights. But they have the situation of custody if there's children involved. There's a support situation, medical bills. There's a lot. They have similar rights as if they're married, except they don't get the equitable distribution.
What about alimony or child alimony? Do they get alimony?
They can get support monies under certain circumstances.
That's interesting. There was famous cases about unmarried individuals living together.
I'm talking about palimony now. That's a little bit
right,
different. Palimony is a different situation, and that's by case law. There's not statutory right to it.
How does that differ for our viewers?
Well, in a palimony situation, it started with the Lee Marvin case in California.
Right. That's the case I was thinking of, Lee Marvin.
Yeah, I had one of the first palimony cases in the state
New Jersey?
As an attorney, yeah. Where parties may live together under promise of marriage by the male to the female, and if they can hold themselves out and she can prove that, she may be able to get a lump sum award by way of palimony, but not necessarily alimony or along those lines.
If somebody has promised to marry them.
Well, you have to show not only promise, but you have to show some proof of it. You have to show more than just I'm going to do that.
Right.
And it's got to be a time period involved and so forth. But it's by case law.
That's interesting. Sharon, how did you get involved in doing divorce work?
Well, I started out as a regular general accountant, and the firm I was working with, they just started doing some litigation support accounting, and they happened one of the partners.
What does that mean for our viewers? Litigation
support accounting are accountants that help attorneys and the courts, and sometimes just the litigants, the people involved in the litigation, solve their financial problems. They do reports, they do analysis, they do assessment, and they try and figure out what's really going on with the money. And one of the partners in the firm I was with had just started doing some litigation work, and he happened to have a big divorce case. And he said, I could use some help on this. And that was the beginning.
What is a big divorce case? Heavy litigants? Fat litigants?
A big divorce case, in my assessment, means there's a lot of money or assets to be either discovered or valued or found or statements to be made in the determination of how the assets can be distributed. There may be some estate planning. The marital estate, the assets may be so great. There's terrific opportunities to do certain types of estate planning that doesn't happen during normal marriages. So those are big divorces. That's what I consider big divorces.
So you got involved in this big divorce, and what?
I got involved in this big divorce. I loved it. They hated each other. The husband and wife hated each other. And we actually were working in that case just for the husband, as opposed to many of my cases where I work for both sides and I'm mutually agreed upon as a joint accountant. In this case, it was just the husband. The parties hated each other, but he had a very large business, and we had to place a value on the business and determine how much money he was really making from his business. Of course, the spouse who was not in the business was claiming all kinds of cash income that he had and that he was hiding, and there were many issues that we had to resolve.
Is that frequently the case, Judge, that a lot of spouses claim there's income that's not being reported?
Yes, many times.
That is. And do you rely on accountants to help you?
I look for the accounts to find out whether it's true or not, and accounts in their own kind of way will not necessarily call it cash, but they have their other technical terms.
We have to be very careful when we put information in front of a judge.
Why is that?
Because the judge has a certain fiduciary duty to report items of tax avoidance to the Internal Revenue Service.
Unreported income.
Yeah.
If there is unreported income, you have an obligation to...
If I make a decision, the ultimate decision, that there's unreported income, I have an obligation to report that case to the authorities, IRS, to the State Attorney General, and to the prosecutor.
Right.
What is the Sheridan case?
That's basically what it says. Now, if there's unreported income, it's one of the things Sharon says. If there's unreported income and the court makes the ultimate decision, this is the way I interpret it, as to whether at the end of the case, and I find that there was unreported income, I have an obligation to report the parties.
And so what does that do? What advice can you give, Sharon, what advice can you give people who have unreported income?
When they get
divorced, because a lot of people know that they have unreported income.
Absolutely.
Both spouses, certainly at least one knows.
Right. And probably the best advice I could give anyone that in any case I'm involved in, if there is unreported income, is to let me do my job. Let me figure out what the numbers are, and then sit down and have a conference and try and settle the case outside of the courtroom and not put it in front of the judge.
Most times it'll settle because they don't want to take a chance. Even if it's the husband's not reporting it, if they sign the joint return or the wife knows about it, they're both going to have a problem.
Is unreported income the same as being very aggressive and deducting expenses?
I was just going to add that. Unreported income, also, if you take non-business deductions on a business,
So you deduct your child's wedding on your business. So, you're very aggressive.
That's not really what they're looking for. They're looking for somebody who's in a cash business doesn't report it all.
That's the unreported income.
Well, that's primarily.
But on an audit, the Internal Revenue Service would also deem inappropriate deductions as...
It could be a crime.
Absolutely.
Right, if you intentionally,
yes.
If you intentionally deduct a personal expense, it could be a crime.
Exactly.
So according to the IRS, it's either unreported monies that you didn't report as income or inappropriate deductions. Either way.
Can the parties agree? Couldn't they use an arbitrator instead of going before a judge? Can they agree to use an independent arbitrator so that they're not bound by?
You're talking about for what purpose?
If both parties know that there's been unreported income, that they haven't reported income on their tax returns, and they're fearful of testifying about unreported income before a judge.
So they go to a mediation and see if the mediator can resolve it, and then they come to the court with a written agreement and go from there.
That works as well.
Well, there's a big move now for mediation because of the high volume of cases, absolutely.
Because, and how does mediation work? Mediation is a voluntary.
It's a voluntary program, although courts are now pushing towards this alternate dispute resolution because of the high volume, where mediator comes in, is paid by the parties, and will try to negotiate a settlement. If it can be done, it's reduced to writing, and then it's placed on the record in the courtroom.
Is
Not
it,
as simple
is
as
it
that, but that's what it is.
Fairly successful?
It's new yet.
It's fairly new.
Didn't the Supreme Court just pass a ruling to make mediation mandatory? Or is that still
It's in
pending?
6 counties now, 3
Okay,
post
yeah.
and 3 pre-judgment as a test case to see if it works out.
I think it's terrific. There's still, even in mediation, there's still an avenue for forensic accounting because there are still those issues that have to be resolved before the
So we're not out of business even in mediation.
Yeah, and actually it's much better for the
You might get
litigant.
more business.
Right. Why? Why? Yeah,
Because there's more mediation.
There'll be more mediation
to help the mediator.
Why there's so many more cases?
Why?
Yeah, you said there's a backlog of cases. That's why you're using mediation. Why are there more people getting divorced? Is that?
What's the divorce rate better than 1 out of 3 or 2 out of 3 or something like that? Just That's the unfortunate fact of life.
Does it keep expanding? Is the divorce?
More and more year. Every year it gets heavier. And the volume is just unbelievable. Some counties are way back. We in Passaic County, 2-3 years ago, would take about 4 years to get yourself divorced from the time you file a complaint. We put a push on it. Now you're about
4 years from the time you file. Some of the marriages aren't 4 years old.
True. Now we're about 18 months.
Takes you longer to get divorced than to get married.
There are a lot of counties that
than
are
the marriage.
the counties now 3 years waiting to just get divorced.
What's causing all the delays, other than the number of cases?
Well, something along the lines of what Sharon said before about the parties that don't like each other. That happens too often. And I say that in my court every day. I don't care if you hate each other. It doesn't bother me. But we're not going to stand in the way of A, resolving the matter, or B, your children. And the dislike is part of the problem. And what happens is they carry that on up to the day of trial and then finally realize what's happening.
I mean, I can get involved in a case where I have been retained by a non-business ownered spouse. And the business ownered spouse, they don't want me around. So they delay.
He doesn't want you around in order to, he doesn't want you to value his business.
They don't want me to value.
He doesn't want you to tell his wife what his really
records or what his real income is. And they delay and they delay, and sometimes it takes me 6 months just to get tax returns. And so those kind of delays hurt the court system.
Well, those are discovery problems. There's a move on
Right.
now to try and reduce that by different rules of court, which you're trying to do with case management and other ways of forcing discovery to take place a lot earlier in the case, and hopefully it'll reduce the backlog.
How could you force a recalcitrant husband from providing the records to?
Sanctions,
Just sanctions. Fees?
fees, penalties,
Could you put him in
fines,
jail?
suppresses pleadings.
Can you put a husband in jail
Not for that, you're not going to.
Could you put him in jail for other things?
Yes.
What kind of things can a husband go to jail for? Or a wife,
Well, total disregard of court rules, complete violations.
if you don't pay
Non-payment.
child support?
If you don't pay, for example, I can put you on a 2-week warrant status. If you don't pay your support for 2 straight weeks, I can have you arrested and brought before me. And if you pay up, you're going to sit in jail till you pay up. There's a lot of ways it can be done.
And when you're in jail, how do they pay up? If they don't have any money when they're out of jail?
Suddenly the money arises.
It's amazing how the money arises.
Remarkable.
It's always that way. If you're in front of me on a non-dissolution matter, for example, and you're brought before the court because you haven't paid and you owe a lot of money in arrears, and I say, okay, fine, I'll remand you to the Passaic County Jail unless you put up at $5,000. But I don't have any money, Judge. $5,000, you put it up, you go home. Turn around as they're walking out, you're going to write the check. So, I mean, it happens, but
So it's amazing how when they go to jail, they suddenly have some money,
absolutely.
but not for child support. So jail is a very potent punishment for a lot of these recalcitrant
We call
spouses.
we call it RAIDS, recently acquired income deficiency syndrome.
Recently acquired income deficiency.
Right.
I like that for people who have to pay support or get divorced.
Right.
Do a lot of spouses hide assets and
Yes.
hide income?
Yes,
They do.
a lot.
Do they hide it from each other, or they hide it just from the government?
Both.
Yeah.
Both, but it's interesting because one of my best sources of information is usually the spouse who's not involved in the business. They know more than one would think they would know. They usually give me tip-offs. I had a doctor once. First of all, when you get a doctor whose tax return shows he's only making $10,000 a year, your
That's
antennas
probably a
have to
problem.
go up, right? Yeah, there's something wrong there. So when I went to his practice and I looked at his income sheets, the only money he ever reported on his tax return was the checks that the patients would actually write while they're there in the office. All the insurance money, I never saw the checks. So I asked, I said,
What do you mean he never deposited the checks that he got from the insurance
Well,
company?
I didn't know what he was doing with them, so I happened to ask his wife, who had nothing to do with this practice, and she said, oh, he keeps a book called an ROA, Received on Account. She said, I think that's where he keeps tracks of those insurance cash. So sure enough, she got me an old book.
An old ROA.
An old ROA book, and sure enough, he's not reporting close to $150,000 a year.
What was he doing with it?
He was putting it in bank accounts in his kids' names. He was just cashing the checks because they come in payable to the doctor. They
Right.
don't come payable to any. He was cashing the checks. He had cash around. He just had it all over the place. Different banks all over the place. But once I knew about the ROA book, which the wife told me about, it became very easy in that case to find the money. It was
Why
simple.
is this litigation so complicated? Why isn't it just, well, tell me what complicates it, other than they hate each other. Is it
That's the primary reason. Sometimes you get attorneys who don't like each other,
the attorneys don't like each other either?
and that creates a problem. Egos come involved. Sometimes attorneys forget they represent clients, and they start taking on the position of the client instead of being the objective party representing him, and that becomes a problem.
Are there moves afoot to educate attorneys
Oh,
on how?
absolutely.
There are.
Professionalism. There's a tremendous move on what we call professionalism in the attorneys to each other as well as to the courts.
We need to take a short break, and we'll be right back with It's All About Money, talking with Judge Diamond and Sharon Maggio on Is Divorce All About Money?
There's this thing going around called sniffing. You think you're getting high, but the dizzy, fuzzy feeling is just what happens when your brain doesn't get oxygen. The chemicals get in the way. So it's like you're not breathing. That's how sniffing causes brain damage and death. So when you think you're sniffing, your brain thinks you're drowning. And your brain is pretty much right.
Listen to your kids.
You need to be really open-minded, not to preach and not to judge.
Be a friend to your child too, let your child know that they can come talk to you.
You got to be able to listen to each other. That's the basis of everything.
Listening is mainly with your ears and not talking at all.
Without listening, there can't be any understanding.
I don't know if a lot of people understand that, but you just sit there and you listen.
Protect your kids from AIDS. Listen to them.
Hi, this is Sam Rosenfarb. You're watching It's All About Money. We're talking about Is Divorce All About Money with Judge Michael Diamond and Sharon Maggio. Right before the break, we were talking about how spouses who owe money all of a sudden come up with cash that they couldn't come up with when they're threatened with jail. Any other interesting behavior patterns that you find with some of the people who come before you, Judge Diamond? Do people people all of a sudden have better memories when you show them certain evidence? Do they?
I'll tell you two things. We have what we call a case information statement, which is a form that has to be filled out by both sides. Pretty much a budgetary form, and tells you what your assets are. And one of the main things that I look at
Both parties fill it out, the husband and the wife?
And yes, both parties. What I usually look at is to see what their scheduled expenses are, the fixed expenses, their living expenses, and so on. And what I find to be very amusing is when the male spouse will put on his statement that he earns a net of $2,500 a month, and his scheduled expenses are about $4,300 a month. Right. And I always say
he earns $2,500, but he spends $4,300.
And the first thing I say to the attorney is, tell me how he spends $4,300 a month, and he's certified that it's true, on $2,500 a month. And they never can answer that question. So there's always something, fudgy on that one. I'll tell you one quick
It
case.
behooves him to increase his expenses on his
Be truthful
reform.
about it. I mean, if you're going to spend $2,500, you're not going to be able to have more. Or if you are, obviously I want to know where the other money is.
Right.
And that leads
See
on
the
to what,
deficit spending like the government does, just borrows money.
Well, the answer always is, well, we borrowed it.
We borrowed it.
I borrowed it from my mother.
Family member, the mother. The mother always comes in.
Or Aunt Tilly in Michigan, or
And I owe it back, but there's nothing in writing.
Have you ever found unreported income, Sharon, doing your work?
often.
Yeah, how do you find it? Give us an example of what you found.
Well,
and how you found
the
it.
doctor story that I told earlier is that was an easy find. Sometimes it's not so easy. Sometimes we have to use some real accounting techniques. And for example, I had to value an auto repair shop once, and the shop was like a 6-bay garage, and he had 5 full-time mechanics, and he was showing income that I felt was certainly less than what I thought that kind of shop should generate. And I asked for all the invoices for all the repairs, and of course they throw them out.
Of course.
But what they don't throw out are the purchases. So based on the types of materials that they were buying, I could go backwards and try and determine how much the sale should be.
So if he bought 50 carburetors, we sold 50 carburetors.
Correct. As well as if he's got 5 or 6 full-time mechanics, there's a certain volume of work that they need to be putting out, or why is he keeping them on the payroll?
He doesn't need 5 mechanics to do three jobs a day.
Correct. So we do those other type of assessments, and in most businesses there's industry standards that we can get at, and that X amount of dollars per hour should be generated if you have so many employees in different kinds of businesses.
So you become a real financial sleuth.
Correct.
Right.
A little Sherlock Holmes hat, and we go sniff around.
Can people fool you?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They can fool.
Well, tell our audience how they could fool you.
Well, if there's a...
That's what they want.
if they're, right,
That's what they want to know.
They're very smart, and they have a business where they take in cash and they purchase their merchandise with cash to keep their accounting margins in line with industry standards. It gets very difficult, but sometimes what I do is if I have a business to value and it's before anybody knows me, if it's a retail type of business, I go there and I see what they do. So one time I had like a fresh produce stand, and I went there to see what kind of register. I bought some fruits and vegetables for my family. I saw that kind of register and how they rung things up and what they did with my money. So I kind of knew their operations before they knew I was there.
So it's hard to fool the sleuth.
Well, we hope it's hard to fool. Right.
Maggio.
Have you ever caught people lying on the stand about unreported income?
Absolutely. I'll tell you one really classic story. I had a business where there was a lot of cash potential in the business, and the husband showed it on his tax return, I think $25,000 or $30,000 a year, and absolutely denied there was any cash involved. The wife testified that there was a lot of cash. She worked with him in the business. At the end of each day, he would take out envelopes and write on the envelopes X to him, Y to his partner, and so on, and broke down between 3 or 4 partners how much they would get and how much would go to the bank. And the deposit slips would coordinate what the bank slip was.
So he allocated the cash among all the people.
That's her testimony. He absolutely denied this. And then
That's what she said. She said he did.
Absolutely.
He said he never did.
She all of a sudden comes in with the envelopes, and sure enough, there's the envelopes with his handwriting on how much he got, how much she got, how much the next person got.
What did his face look like when you showed him, when
He wasn't too
her
happy
lawyer
about it. He
showed him
wasn't
the
too happy about it. P.S. that was one case I reported.
So you reported that to the IRS. And then what happens when you reported that?
I really don't know. They don't
go back.
I
They don't like, by the way, Judge, this is what happened.
Several years ago, I have no idea what.
And you don't get a 10% reward for everything.
Not that way.
For everything they collect.
No.
Another thing we do is look at their personal lifestyle, kind of like what Judge Diamond was talking about with the CIS. So that I had one client whose husband, they built a new house together, and they paid for a lot of the house with the cash that he wasn't reporting. Well, she kept a black book of everything that they paid for in cash. So with the aid of that book, we were able to determine how much more income he really had, and we use that. We also use the case information statement. If somebody says that they're spending that much money, well, we're going to assume they're making that much money.
What is equitable distribution? That's a term you hear about in divorce. What does that mean?
An easy way to say it's a fair distribution of your property. That's property, it's not money. You're talking about real estate, you're talking about cars, you're talking about furniture, stocks, bonds, things like that.
Does fair mean 50-50?
Not always.
Not always.
Equitable.
Equitable.
Doesn't always have to be 50-50.
So who determines what's equitable?
Judge.
That means you. So neither lawyer can know with any precision what each
Well, they'll
party's
come and
going to
argue. They'll argue either for 50-50, 60-40, depending on the length of the marriage and the circumstances.
Is
But
it
the
sometimes
judges-
other than 50-50?
Yes.
Based on,
His contribution, length of marriage.
does it matter whether they've had children or not? In terms of
I don't think that's a fair way to look at it. I don't think
Yeah.
whether it's children or not is not the issue as far as equitable distribution is concerned. It might have a bearing on the amount of money that comes through, obviously.
and how do you value, you said it doesn't include cash, the equitable distribution. What happens to the cash?
Well,
You said the equitable distribution includes the non-cash assets.
I'm talking about the non-support aspects.
I understand.
If you have IRAs, that kind of stuff, that's part of equitable distribution. You're dividing that up.
Right.
But not in the support.
What
basis.
happens to a pension plan when it gets divided up? Because people have a pension plan, it's in the name of one spouse or another. How do you allocate
It's
that?
rolled over or traded. Well,
Well, depending on the either the decision of the judge or the settlement of the parties, however the pension gets hacked up, so to speak, or gets rolled over, a portion of it, the non-owner spouse would get a portion of that pension. There are several options. They can have it rolled over into their own individual retirement account, which is usually a good option because then they get to control it. They can do what they want
Do
with the money.
most cases settle?
yes.
They do. So they go through all of this process, this litigation process of discovery and lawyers and make motions and fill out case information statements. And then at the end of the day, they spend a lot of money.
A lot of money. Right, they really do.
What is
And 95% of them settle either before or at trial.
So what's the solution? If they're going to settle anyway and they go through this whole process, shouldn't they settle first before they spend all this money?
You have to know what the assets are and before you can reach a settlement. But the answer to your question, in my opinion, if they'd be a little bit more fair and reasonable in their approach and do your discovery without fighting it and get everything on the table up front, it's a lot easier to sit down and talk settlement.
You practiced as a lawyer for a lot of years before you became a judge.
Yes.
Is it in a lawyer's interest to postpone the settlement?
You're asking me as a lawyer or asking me as a judge?
Well, in your opinion, from your observations, both as a lawyer and as a judge, in your observations, do lawyers tend to churn or postpone this ultimate settlement?
On the most part, no.
On the most part, they don't. So it's even though it's in their financial interest to postpone a settlement.
Well, it's not postpone a settlement. They may take a little bit longer to get to a trial or to get to the settlement, but it's not really postponing it.
What do you see from the lawyers
Well,
you do it?
I think most of them try and move their cases as best they can. I'm not a psychologist, but I also think that there's a certain amount of emotions that the very angry people have to go through before they can get to that point in their divorce process where they have the ability and the ability to be pragmatic enough to settle their case. I think that they have to get through a certain, almost like a death.
They want to be heard.
Yeah.
They want to say
They want their day in court.
Yeah,
That's
they're not
exactly
ready to settle it.
Yeah, they want to be able to spit it out and say, this is what I've said. They want somebody to hear their plight. That's the problem.
I think lawyers have to be careful because they're advocating for their client. I think they have to be guided by their client's wishes.
Is the system generally fair?
Yes.
To both spouses,
Absolutely.
the husband and the wife?
I believe so.
Yeah. Do you think it's fair to the non-earning spouse, the alimony rules, the child support rules?
Absolutely.
So what could a wife, assuming that the wife stayed at home with children and the husband went off to work, what could she expect in terms of alimony, in terms of percentages? Is that a harder question?
It doesn't work that way. You have to look at standard of living, ability to earn, what's their custom, how have they been for the term of their marriage, long-term marriage, short-term marriage, age of the children, can the wife go out and work?
Those are all factors that come into play.
Yes.
So if the longer-term marriage, the less she's able to work, the more money there is, the more likely she is to maintain a lifestyle?
Suppose the wife worked before children were born, then children are born, she stops. And now 10 years later, the kids are in school and she wants to go back to work, but she's been out of training. She doesn't know computers. She doesn't know typing. She can get what they call rehabilitative alimony for a period of time and then work her way into permanent. There's all different ways that, and fairness will be treated to both parties.
And the judges have the discretion to be creative in terms of
Absolutely.
Of carving out a settlement, carving out a decision.
Obligation, not discretion.
Thanks very much. You've been watching It's All About Money. You've been hearing from Judge Diamond and Sharon Maggio on divorce. If you have any questions or information about tonight's show, write to me, Sam Rosenfarb, Rosenfarb Winters and Company, 101 Eisenhower Parkway, Roseland, New Jersey, 07068, or give me a call at 973-618-0800. Thanks very much, Judge Diamond.
Remember, we have to protect our water and our neighbors that we share it with if we want to protect ourselves.
Thanks for joining us. Next week, we'll visit a woman who has developed a thriving business growing herbs. Join us there to find out how she does it. I'm Peter Tong. Remember, we live on the good green earth. Let's keep it that way.